Hello and welcome to episode number 2 of How Your Food Choices Affect You and Your World. I'm Pamela Ziemann with Elemental Cuisine, where we help people transition out of the sad diet to a healthy plant-based lifestyle. And it's about so much more than food. It's about connecting the dots. And before I introduce our guest today, I just want to say that thank you for being here, because if you're like me and most of the people I know, sometimes you just want to run away from your computer because there is so much information coming at us all the time. But you'll be happy to know that today's theme is about enlightening yourself and knowing where your food comes from, and that means having a direct experience. Not somebody else telling you what's right and wrong, but you having your own direct experience so that you can learn to trust yourself more and to have better, more informed decisions. And now our guest today is Robert Grillo, and I'm so happy he's with us today because he not only is the executive director from a nonprofit called Free from Harm, he's also in this book, Circles of Compassion, that is hot, hot, hot off the press from Amazon. I just got mine a couple of days ago. And Robert's coming to us from Chicago. So how is it over there in Chicago, Robert?
Can't complain, not too bad. We've had a pretty mild winter so far.
Yeah, awesome. Awesome. So we're talking about direct experience today, and I know you have over 20 years of marketing as your profession. Now, how did you go from a marketing professional into animal advocacy and creating this Free from Harm? What was the moment where you connected the dots yourself?
Yeah, that's something I've given a lot of thought to. And I would say about 5 years ago is when I started becoming aware, and my interest was peaking in animal advocacy as I learned more about the facts behind animal agriculture. And it connected with what I was doing because prior to that, and even up to now, for the better part of the last 20 years, I've been working in the branding, design, marketing field. And I started out as a young man, which was almost 20 years ago. Started out as a freelance artist and designer, and I would take gigs at different big ad agencies in Chicago. And as some of you might know, Chicago is kind of known for its food advertising. We have big giants here like Kraft Foods and McDonald's and big players. And so I had the opportunity of working inside of the agencies that create the brands and the stories and the images and the advertising that we see that so heavily shape our attitudes and desires and our perceptions of food. So I
imagine at the time you were just saying, hey, that's another job I can take, that's great, I'm getting paid for my work, without really going too deep into what you're marketing. Is that true or not?
Exactly. At the time, I was taking what work I could find, and I was delighted to have it because as a newbie, as somebody who was kind of just getting started, first of all, I loved the freelance lifestyle because I'm very much of a nonconformist. I'm an entrepreneurial type of person. I don't like working as an employee, never have, and probably never will. So this kind of lifestyle really agreed with me, and I could kind of bounce around and find the work that I liked. So I was glad to have the work. But then, about 5 years ago was when I started looking a lot more critically at this and seeing that not only could I no longer work in that particular work those kinds of clients, but also I realized that I realized how important their influences were, and most of us don't see it. And that led me to develop this presentation and this whole kind of project around building awareness about how popular culture informs and shapes our food choices. And these companies and this branding and marketing of food is is one of the key forces driving popular culture. Lots of things happening out there in our everyday lives that we're not seeing. And my idea is to help people to see these things, to see these facts,
so that they can make their own informed decisions. Because I know, like when I would go into the grocery store years and years ago, I'd see something that had healthy or maybe, you know, something like that on the label. And we all want to be healthy, so I'd grab that without really knowing behind the scenes what was going on. So that's kind of what led you into what you're doing now?
Right. Yeah, it certainly did. And, you know, on the subject of animal agriculture and, you know, animal products specifically, what I learned is that having the experience of actually rescuing and raising and learning from and observing and forming deep bonds of friendship with farmed animals like chickens and turkeys and ducks and things of that nature, it really made me realize that this world of the way animals are portrayed in popular culture is so completely misrepresented from who these animals really are. And so I found myself in these two, like dealing with these two very starkly different realities. On the one hand, the new reality about my firsthand real life experiences with animals, with individual animals, and getting to know them as companions. And then the world of popular culture that's always feeding us these myths and fictions about farmed animals, that they're stupid and they're just cartoonish and they don't really care about their lives and they're simple-minded, and you know, all of these denigrating stereotypes that are perpetuated by popular culture, because of course this is what serves the economic interests of the animal exploiting industries. They want us to think that these animals don't care what happens to them, because if we don't care, we'll continue to just consume them thoughtlessly without even really giving any thought to what we're eating and where it comes from and the lives that are behind all of those consumer products on the shelf.
Yeah, I know you had a chicken named Doris, who I got to meet, which is just such a wonderful little animal. And when you actually have that bird sitting on your lap when you're working on your laptop, you intimately get to know that this bird has, you know, a life, and it wants to live, and it isn't just a wing or a leg that you might get at a restaurant somewhere. So that was your direct experience with getting to know who and what you're eating.
Right, and that, you know, Doris is the closest, and you know, the most intimate example of that. There's certainly so many others, but Doris and I had daily interaction. She worked with me, she sat with me and napped in my lap and curled up like a cat and purred like a cat. And you know, there's really no difference if we allow these animals into our lives in a way that we see them as companions. They respond in kind. They don't really want to be, they don't want to have the traditional role that we've assigned them. That's just us projecting onto them a kind of what we want. But actually, if we allow them to be companions, they respond in kind. They respond a lot like our cats and dogs, and there's virtually no important difference.
And some of our audience members, I would imagine, may feel a disconnect. I know I did, because when I was growing up, I really loved the cows. I grew up on a farm, and I'd go out and talk to these cows. I was extremely shy as a little kid, but I found that I could articulate my thoughts because cows are the best listeners. And I would go out there and tell them everything about my day, and then when I would see them taken into slaughter, they didn't want to go. And now when I see happy cow on the milk container, or, you know, like they really want to do this for us, and I just know from firsthand experience that it isn't true, and I think this has been hidden from most of us. Most of the CAFOs, the confined animal factory units, are out, hidden away from people, so we don't really know, and that's the way they want it to continue, so that they can continue to profit from this exploitation.
Yes, and you know, like you said, this whole world of animal agriculture is largely invisible to us. Like, for example, I often say in my presentations, there are 32 farmed animals for every American. Imagine that. Imagine how many people you see in your everyday life. But, you know, then imagine the fact that there are 32 times as many farmed animals, and how many times do you ever see a real farmed animal alive? Almost never. I mean, because we're really not supposed to see them. They're supposed to be hidden away. On the other hand, there's this whole movement about knowing where your food comes from, and these small local, the locavore movement, I guess you could properly call it. And they're about making the invisible visible. But just because you make something visible doesn't necessarily make it ethical. And that's another variation on this disconnect that we're talking about. Just because you see something, a wrongdoing done, you see an animal being abused or killed violently, which is absolutely necessary in the case of animal agriculture, regardless of the size of the farm or how ethically someone claims to love or raise their animal, they're still going to be violently killed in their adolescent or infant age. So seeing that isn't necessarily absolving oneself. It's not necessarily making something ethical. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, and that's the thing. Most people, I think all human beings are basically compassionate, and we want to feel that we're making compassionate choices. We want to feel good about what we're consuming. And so if we see, you know, cage-free, we might think, oh, well, that's good. Or if we see organic or something like that, we feel better about ourselves, but we're actually paying more money for that, and it isn't always true.
Right, absolutely. I could give you an example of one of our last rescues. He had fallen off of a truck that was bound to a live poultry market that claims to have the freshest, organic, healthiest poultry you can buy. You pay a premium for it, but you get to pick your chicken, or you get it fresh, killed right there. So, you know, this poor, pathetic little individual that we picked up in the alley, who had fallen off of a truck bound to the live poultry market where he would inevitably be slaughtered, was found paralyzed in the alley in absolutely sub-freezing weather and terrible wind. We had a terrible windstorm. And so we brought him back, but we had to euthanize Peter. We named him Peter. We had to euthanize him because he was paralyzed. He was so far gone that the vet said that there was no way to rehabilitate him. So these victims fall through the cracks of invisibility. They are part of the whole invisible system. Behind this facade of humane locavore is actually, you know, victims like Peter, who never asked to be a part of this world. They were born into this world by no choice of their own, only to become, you know, part of this terrible system that uses and abuses them.
So for our listeners out there who are saying, hey, but I need to eat meat, you know, some people really feel like maybe they haven't properly nourished themselves, and so they go back to eating meat, but how can they get a direct experience themselves? I mean, how can we actually see, like Mark Zuckerberg, I think he said for a year, he's like, I'm only going to eat that which I can kill myself. So he had his own direct experience on it. How can the average person, other than going to the internet, which is a start, but how can the average person actually get a direct experience of where their food is coming from and to be able to make a choice that fits with their own moral ethics?
Well, you know, that's why we kind of created what we call the virtual sanctuary, because for those who will never meet a farmed animal, or who will never have a face-to-face or visit to a sanctuary where they can actually meet farmed animals that are not being exploited, they're just living, they're just being, they're allowed to live out their lives. For those that cannot have that experience, we have videos and images and stories. We publish a lot of content about our rescues, so people can meet the individual animals and get to know them. It's like the next best thing to being there, you know? You're getting the virtual experience. And that's very powerful for a lot of people.
And that's at freefromharm.org?
Freefromharm.org, yeah. For those that think, you know, that they would have a problem or they would have some problem without having meat in their diets, I just try to get people to think about what meat really means, because it's, you know, meat could mean many things. Prior to our big consumption of animal flesh, meat was a lot of things. It's solid food. It's food that has nutrients. And meat is a commodity. It's a food product. It doesn't necessarily represent what we're eating. So when we say we're eating meat, we're really just eating an animal that had a whole lifetime of experience or wanted to. It's so much more than just a piece of meat. That's just the commodity, the end product. But we can get all those nutrients, of course, and I'm sure you're better at this than I am, but we can get all the nutrients we need from plant sources, so we can easily make that transition.
Yeah, it's true. You know, I became a vegetarian in the 70s and vegan about 5 years ago, and I know it was a lot harder then because I didn't have a lot of choices in southern Minnesota to go vegetarian. And what some people have done, and what I did too, was I just became a junk food vegan because I love the animal so much. I was thinking, as long as it's not an animal, I'm going to eat it. But that wasn't healthy either. And, you know, when I became vegan, then I went whole foods, plant-based, and that's when everything changed in my life because I could really feel good about what I was eating, and it was good for me, and it was good for the animals, and good for our world as well. I mean, that new documentary, Cowspiracy, is really something about talking about the environmental devastation of animal agriculture.
Yeah, it sure is. Yeah, I guess my diet is kind of somewhere in between. You know, I try to be as healthy as I can, and I also eat convenience foods. So I do kind of partake in some of the junk food, and but I strive to, I strive for self-preservation. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, self-preservation, and it is a process too. I like to tell people that you don't have to be black and white about it if you want to transition and really stuff yourself with the really good stuff. Like, have enough in your refrigerator and on your counter that you can easily grab the really good food for you. And I encourage people to prep a lot of veggies first part of the week or whenever you have a day that you're not so busy, and have it ready to go. Because I'm like anybody, if it's not ready and I'm hungry, I will be tempted to grab something that isn't the best for me. But the best thing, as we see our parents aging, most of us, if you're in the baby boomer era, you're seeing your parents age. And what we do now makes a huge difference when we get older. So it's like, do what you can now. So let's get back, Robert, to making an informed decision through direct experience. I love this concept where you're going with that, to have a direct experience, not just listening to what authority told you, because authority figures may have ulterior motives, or they may just be taking things from what they've heard from their parents. So how can we learn to trust ourselves more by getting a direct experience?
Well, I think it all starts with questioning what you've been taught. And, some people, I've been asked, like in certain interviews, well, what's your life mantra? And I guess I'd have to pick the mantra that says, question what you've been taught. We don't have to, we grow up and we question everything about our family and the way we were raised. We question our parents' politics, how they spend their money, we question their religion, we question every aspect of how they were raised and they raise us. And then we decide this is how we want to be adults and this is how we want to raise our children. And we want to learn from previous mistakes. That's, that's part of like our, in the modern age we think about that a lot. There's a lot we can learn and improve upon. And the one area where we don't seem to question very well is when it comes to the cultural forces that shape our food choices. We rarely question why we eat what we eat. And we continue the tradition of our grandparents and parents as if, you know, there's no, that's like sacred ground. You don't question that. And of course, there's all these positive emotions and memories and nostalgia associated with, you know, making your grandmother's whatever it is, you know. And so people look upon that with a lot of endearment.
Hey, Robert, you don't mess around with American apple pie. I mean, you just don't do it, right? That's
Right.
taboo.
I've had people ask me, well, my grandmother slaughtered chickens, so was she a horrible person? And I say, well, the thing is that she was taught to view those animals in a certain way, and she acted on it, and she never questioned it. It doesn't mean that as a totality that she was a horrible person, but she never actually questioned whether there was a problem, that it was okay to harm chickens like that, but it's not okay to do it to dogs or humans.
Right. And there was a time that we didn't question slavery. There was a time we didn't question any of that. But it's it's very similar to what we're dealing with now. It's just like Albert Einstein said about widening your circle of compassion to include more living beings.
Right. It's part of the questioning process that I think once someone is on the path to questioning, they start unraveling all that they've been taught, and they start realizing that a lot of this is borrowed in its assumptions, and it doesn't really stand up logically, and it doesn't really reflect who we are. You know, we say we want less suffering in the world. Most people agree. Less suffering is better than more suffering, and so everybody wants to see that for themselves and others. How can we reduce our impact? How can we reduce the impact on others and on the planet? And since
go ahead.
The 99% of the animals that are harmed by humans are those that are used as food animals, as a resource for food. The impact we can have just by making a few, some simple dietary and lifestyle changes is enormous. It affects 99-point-something% of all animals.
Wow.
So it seems like a big deal, like to make the change when you're not there yet and you're thinking about it. But when you realize the enormity of the positive impact you're having on others, it seems like a small token of a life change, really.
You know, it always feels good to me to know I can actually make a difference in the world. And when you see everything on the news and everything that's so wrong with the world, to think that 3 times a day I can make a difference by what I'm putting on my plate. Although I can also see from the average person out there, it isn't easy because you have all these forces trying to pull you back into the mainstream malaise and just pull you back into the system. So you've got to be really strong to get out of it. So what do you think, Robert, would be the benefit for somebody to actually go against all of those forces that are trying to pull them back into the old system? Why do it?
I think the biggest benefit is that you apply what you already believe to the 99% of the animals that are impacted by our food choices. In other words, we already believe that it's wrong to unnecessarily and gratuitously harm animals. It's the reason why we think cockfighting and dogfighting is wrong. It's the reason why when we hear a news story about a teenager torturing and killing a cat, we condemn it. And it's the reason why when we hear the news story of the pit bull that was branded, we're mortified by it. And so we already believe that it's wrong to unnecessarily harm animals, and that less suffering is better than more. So it's just a matter of applying what we already believe to the 99% that are affected by our choices.
Right. And if you ever get a chance to come out to Sequim, Washington, there's a great sanctuary right here where you can go up and actually be with the animals, to look them in the eye and get a direct experience that way, or any other farm sanctuary. Because growing up on a farm, I know that you couldn't really get close to the animals. I mean, I could talk to them from behind a fence, but I couldn't get close to them because they knew what was coming. They instinctively knew that we were going to kill them. But when you go out to a sanctuary, you can walk right up to these cows. You can just lom on them. You can just, you know, just like a dog, you can pet this whole cow, because they know, they just know that it is a peaceful place. And I think, you know, we all want peace on earth. And what better way to start than just, you know, live and let live, I guess.
Exactly. Right. And, you know, not everybody is ready for this message. I understand that there are people that there's too many obstacles, psychological or physical obstacles that they have to take making that kind of transition in their life. But it's one of the reasons why we've gone to great lengths to address on our website the many common objections and obstacles that people have to making this transition. And we've, you know, we've covered most of the major ones. I just got I had a radio interview last week with a young lady in Europe, Talk Radio Europe, and she wanted to talk just specifically for a half an hour about our one page on our website, which is about the most common objections to eating animals, or to continue to eat animals. And we went through many of them, and she said, well, what about this one and that one? And there's so many out there. So I think people need to feel like they can overcome these objections and feel that they can embrace it. And so it's a process.
And that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on the show today, Robert, because I actually meet a lot of people who are closet plant-based eaters. You know, it's like they don't want to tell anybody else, but they say, I really don't want to eat animals. But it's so scary to come out there with it. I mean, it's just like coming out of the closet saying, hey, you know what, I don't eat animals. And there are a lot of people who just need to hear that it's possible, you know, like from people like us who are like, hey, I'm not dead yet. I've been doing this for a long time, and I actually feel really good. So it is possible, and they need to see a little bit of hope, I think, and some kindred spirits who are doing something that they might want to do themselves.
Absolutely. You got to find your support. You got to find your community.
Exactly.
Even if you're in a small town and all you've got is an online community, you can find it somewhere.
Yeah. So I know you're really busy, Robert, with so much going on. What's on your agenda for the next few days? What do you have coming up?
Well, I've got a couple of interviews. We've got a few posts to publish on our website, and got a lot of different fundraising activities going on, and talking to a couple of new writers that might contribute some work to our site. So it's just a juggling act of all kinds of different things happening here.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the show today. It was really great to talk with you. We could go on. And for the listeners out there, if you have any comments for Robert or I, any questions or anything, just post them down below and we'll get back to you. And I also want to say that next week I have Meadow Lynn from the Mystic Chef, the Mystic Cookbook. Yeah, that's it. And she does the secret alchemy of food. So that's going to be really fun. I hope you can join us for that one. And any last comments from you, Robert? What would you like to leave our listeners with?
I would just like to thank you, Pamela, for having me on. And I would like to welcome anybody who cares to engage me in conversation or has any questions to feel free to email me at robert@freefromharm.org. Join our Facebook page. We have over 100,000 fans now. And sign up to our site for news alerts if you'd like to keep up with what we're publishing.
Awesome. And I see you are on the Plus, too. You're on Google Plus as well.
Absolutely.
Cool. Okay, well, thanks again, Robert. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.